When you're struggling with faith for where God will take you to, look back at everything He's brought you from and hold on to that. It's the end of the year, and if you're anything like me, outside of planning for what you want your new year to look like, another thing you might be doing is looking back on what this year had for you. The things you thought would happen the way they did, but they didn't, or the way that you thought that the promises of God would manifest and they haven't. And especially when the things that we were hoping for don't land the way we had hoped for, it can be quite daunting and depressing. And it can also kind of rattle our faith. So I wanted to come on here and share my struggles with this and also offer a few tips that can help you stay aligned, keep the faith, and keep moving forward, even when the things aren't happening the way that you thought the things would happen. The truth is that God knows our hearts, whether you tell Him or not, whether you admit it or not. So for me, I no longer lie to God. If I'm feeling down, if I'm feeling disappointed, I go to God and I'm like, Dad, you said you would do this. You said it was going to look like this, and I'm not seeing it. And I think a big part of having a relationship with Christ is understanding the different ways that we have access to God. One of them being Abba, Father. Yes, there's God the provider, there's God the banner, there's Jehovah Jireh, and all of that good stuff. And all of it is necessary in different seasons of our lives. But being able to remember that God is your dad who actually really loves you. And if you have a father, an earthly father, or someone who you have that father type relationship with, think of when you were a kid and that person disappointed you, or they said they were going to do something and they hadn't done it. How did you go up to them? You're like, oh, you hurt my feelings. You promised me that you were going to do this and you didn't do it. And that person, in loving you, was like, oh, I'm still going to do it, or they comforted you. And I think that that's one of the things that a lot of us miss in God, like being able to go to Him. I don't need to talk to God in an HR voice. I don't need to be like, Abba, Father, my favorite, most holy, hallowed Father, please hear my cry, oh Lord. Like, no, that's fake. It's not real. It's inauthentic. And it's also so cold. Like, in being able to go to God and be like, God, this disappointed me. Not only are you being honest, but you're also opening a door to compassion. Like, God is looking at you like, that's my child, and they're sad, and He has a heart for you. And that doesn't mean that things are going to change overnight, but you're keeping that communication open in a real and authentic way. Because the moment we start to feel like, oh, God's let us down, and we've been told that we can't complain to God, or we can't question God, or we can't ask God what's happening, it starts to put up a wall between us and God and our relationship. Because now, instead of us feeling open and able to go to God about anything, we start to rehearse and feel like we have to come to Him all prim and proper, instead of just coming to Him as a child, going to their father, being like, Dad, you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. And in that putting up the wall, it can start to breed a separation and also a resentment and mistrust between us and trusting God to be who God is. And the truth is, God doesn't change, but our perspective of how we can perceive or access Him does change, and it can either be beneficial to us or detrimental. So remember that God is your Father, and go to Him with the stuff. Tell Him how you feel. Do not be a liar to Him, because you're lying to yourself. He already knows what time you're on. So why not turn that clock and let Him know what's actually happening in truth? Along the lines of this, another thing is that it is absolutely okay to ask God questions. Oh my gosh, as a Christian growing up, there was always this fear of like, don't ask God questions, don't question God. And it also rooted from, I think, wrong interpretation of scripture, as well as being the child of Nigerian, like immigrant parents who culture and respect is a really big thing, and questioning your parents was seen as like the ultimate disrespect. I think both of those things kind of bled into one another, in the sense that my visual representation of God or ultimate authority on earth growing up is my parents. And then whatever the boundaries or limitations that was created in that dynamic, it was kind of a natural and easy progression for me to assume that that was also the boundaries that I had to set in my relationship with God. But that's not true. Throughout the Bible, there are people who God loved, people after God's own heart, asking him questions like, why is this going like this? Are you sure I gotta go this way? If possible, can you let this cup pass from me? Even after God had given them clear instructions. And the thing is that when we ask God questions, the purpose is that we're trying to understand him more. You know, like if this is a relationship between us and Christ, and by virtue of Christ, God, a healthy relationship has a level of understanding. So when I don't understand something that's happening in my life or a situation, asking God why is my way of getting to know him more. Also understanding that even if the why or the answer to the why doesn't ever come, or I don't get that clarity, there's still an ultimate trust and an obedience that comes from God generally that will allow me to move forward. But being in a place where I'm so overwhelmed, I'm not understanding why things are happening, and now getting to the point where I'm like, I can't even ask God why this is happening to me, that is a miserable relationship. And this is not a miserable relationship. I think that's how we just need to look at our relationship with Christ. Like any other relationship, imagine you were dating someone and anytime something wasn't going right, you were terrified to ask them for clarity or advice. It sounds like abuse. Why would you want to be there? So why are we approaching God in a way that will lead to our ultimate separation from him because we're afraid to have these conversations with him? So ask God why. If you don't understand something, ask him why. The reason why I'm even where I am today and I'm doing all the work I'm doing is because there was a day where I was like, God, make this stop. All of this pain, everything, whatever the reason why you have me going through this, I think I've learned the lesson. I need you to stop it. Like, I'm done. Like, why am I going through this? Why am I experiencing this? This feels horrible. This was back in 2019. And in the midst of that, God comforted me and was like, all of the energy that you've put into your past, if you put it into yourself, I'll make you great. And that was an interesting answer to the question, and it wasn't a clear answer. That still took me on a journey that I'm still trying to work through and figure out exactly what that means. But he offered me comfort. I needed to be heard. I needed to remember and see that God hadn't forgotten me and that I wasn't just suffering in vain. And the only way God was able to speak to me at a time where he knew I could hear it was when I not only got to my wit's end, but also came to him and said, God, I'm at my wit's end. And in that desperation, in that truth and honesty, he was like, okay, my child, this is how I'm going to comfort you. I haven't forgotten you. This is still a part of the journey and we're working through it. So ask God why. Why did it happen like that? Why did you have to lose that person? Why did that thing that you were so excited about get ripped out of your hands? And trust God that even if he doesn't give you an answer that is clear as day, he is going to offer you comfort because his strength is made whole in our weakness. So if we can't even acknowledge that we have weaknesses and curiosities, how are we leaving room for him to show up and manifest his strength in our lives and give us that courage and peace to move forward? The final thing I want to leave you with is that you need to keep a tally of God's track record. So even as this year is wrapping up and you're looking at the things that you thought would have happened by now, the prayers that God said he would answer that you haven't seen, I want you to first of all remember that God is a God of the 11th hour. So as long as there's a moment left, there is still time. So don't lose faith, don't lose hope. But outside of that, even when things don't happen the way that we thought they would, one thing that you can always do is look back on God's track record. And when you pay attention to it, the things that you thought that would have destroyed you that haven't, the paths that were so crooked, but somehow still landed you exactly where you needed to be, all of those little inklings of God having his hand like intentionally on you are Gatorade or Powerade or whatever you want to call it to keep you going. Right now, you don't see this one yet. It's looking blurry. You thought it was supposed to be clear, but all the other ones that you couldn't see until hindsight somehow ended up being clear. So you use God's track record as the motivating fuel for you to continue to go forward, because sometimes we hear it wrong. And I won't even say sometimes we hear it wrong. Sometimes we interpret what we hear wrong. God can say that this thing is going to happen by this time. Yes, valid. And it can be as simple as that the exact date he gave you, that's when it's going to happen. Or it can be that date or that timing is when the heaven and earth shift is going to hit or collide, and the shift is going to start to happen. So even though you don't see a tangible shift on that day, or that thing doesn't fall in your lap that day, that doesn't mean that the floodgates of it and the preparation or the red carpet of it happening and coming into your life wasn't activated on that day. So understanding that God does his stuff his own way. His ways are above our ways. We can't fully understand it. And even to try and fully understand it could potentially like blow our brains up and overwhelm us. Gives us a level of peace that God doesn't lie. He says his word doesn't return to him void. So God, if this is a word that you have truly said over my life, my prayer is to continue to have the motivation to continue to move forward, and trusting that in your due time, your most amazing time, that's never 1 second late or 1 second early, you'll do it for me. That becomes the prayer. And because of the track record, it gives you the ability to have peace and faith in the uncertainty of the now, because all of the uncertainties of the past always kind of worked out together for your good. So I hope that this video helps you and that you keep going and talk to God, like talk to your dad and let him know that, you know, this sucks. I thought this would look a little different by now. I don't feel good about it. I'm scared. I'm losing faith. I'm losing hope. I'm starting to be affected in my self-confidence because I don't feel like I'm doing the right things, or I feel like other people who aren't doing the right things are getting the right things. Like, be honest. Like, your relationship with God is not where you mince words and where you're politically correct. Like, talk that talk, because you need to let it out. And my prayer for you is that you will continue to have the faith to push forward, and that God will give you peace as you're on the journey, and that as you're moving forward, your steps will be strengthened and boldened, and that any path that you take that is not the right path will feel so clearly wrong that you'll be able to walk away from it. And any path that you take that is the right path for you will feel so calmly correct that you won't even have to second guess it or question it. So I hope that this video helps you. And if you like this video, if you found it beneficial and you want to hear more about how to practically apply biblical principles, that you'll subscribe. And if you have a friend who has been sharing these types of thoughts with you, I would really ask that you share this video with them. And I want you to continue to be kind to yourself, because you're a work in progress, making progress. And I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.